Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's Friday. You made it. You're almost there. It's been quite a week, and I'm so grateful to see so many of you here this morning signed on, and it's been fantastic to see so many repeat names, whether you know it or not. I've been watching you, even if you haven't been watching me. I've been seeing all these names pop up in all the variety of sessions, and it's so great to see that you've had an opportunity to engage with all of the sessions here during the STEAMpower Conference. And here we are at 9 o'clock. This session is called Observe Animals and Do Science. Just a real quick heads up, there was a schedule change. If you are looking for the session hosted by Dr. Doug Lufbrow on creating equity in the computer science classroom, unfortunately, Dr. Lufbrow was unable to attend the conference, but we have an awesome workshop in its place. And as the name implies, we are going to be observing animals and we're going to be doing science. So I thought, what better way to wrap up the week than to look at animals? And that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We're going to observe scientists as they observe animals, and then we ourselves are going to observe animals. So there will be an interactive component. We will stay together as an entire group, but we will be participating in this activity as if we are the learner. So that way you can take your experience as the learner and bring it directly into your classroom with your students. A little bit about myself. I am supporting the STEAM Hub at the San Diego County Office of Education for this school year. And it's been absolutely fantastic providing resources and running workshops such as this on a recurring basis for the county office. And of course, that team is maybe better known as the Lisa team, but of course, Lisa, Jessica, and Melissa are also on that STEAM Hub team, and they help provide these resources, host meetups, and create activities for all of you folks in the expanded learning world. Okay, so the STEAM Hub, we have a website. You likely know about this already. This is just a quick shout out to let you know that this workshop, the resources that are tied to this workshop, and then even more are up on our website. And if you use this website to get to the conference registration, you're probably already aware, but again, we have conference information, but oh so much more on that website. And of course, that is tied to the County Office of Education. All right, so let's get into the workshop. Let's jump right in. Now, I know you can't click on my PowerPoint here, so I am going to paste this into the chat. Everything you need is located right here. So I want to orient you in this folder before we start. And I'll link myself. I'll show you what it looks like. There's a few files right here in the first folder. One's the PowerPoint. You're welcome to take that and adapt it and use it however you like. There are no secrets here. The second one is a list of links. And the list of links I'll go over in just a moment. But again, you may find those helpful. There is a fantastic, comprehensive, absolutely wonderful PDF from the Field Museum in Chicago. So if you like what we are doing today and you want more, this PDF has it for you. It has essentially the animal observation techniques that we're going to use today, and then several other techniques that you can use to make this an even bigger and broader lesson. And then in a short while, once we go over what scientists do in the field when they make animal observations, we ourselves are going to make animal observations. And if you click on that animal observation subfolder, you'll see that there are a list of files, and we'll be choosing one of these files and we'll be working out of it right here in this workshop. Because again, I want you to be the learner during our time together so that you can take your learning experience and directly import it into your classroom. So we'll come back to these files, but make sure you keep that tabbed off to the side so that you can revisit that. But let's go ahead, let's bounce back to our presentation here. Now that you have that link, again, that link's in the chat room as well. I want to introduce to you a scientist named Dr. Joyce Poole. And she is such a cool scientist. I've read up on her, I've read articles on her, I've watched videos of what she's done, and I want to share a little bit about what she has done for the science community. First off, Dr. Poole lives and works in Mozambique. And it's always great when you're talking about countries or even locations in the United States. Who are we kidding? But any location outside of San Diego, it's probably a good idea to give your students some frame of reference. Where is this place that we are talking about? And of course, you can tour the world using Google Maps. So type in Mozambique in Google Maps, and it'll highlight the country for you. Now, to give you a little framework, Mozambique here in southern Africa, and it's right next to Madagascar, right? Madagascar is the island, and Mozambique is sort of right next to it. Of course, there's a channel of water in between. But once we find this context, okay, what do we know about the southern portion of Africa? What do we know about Africa in general, right? What kind of animals do we find there? What kind of environments do we find? So allowing students to bring in their prior knowledge, instead of asking them, what do you know about Mozambique? You'll probably get some blank stares. But if you say, what do you know about this part of the world? What environments exist here? What types of animals exist here? Students are going to start drawing in things that they have learned in the past. Some may say, hey, I saw a movie on Madagascar. They may remember the Disney movie. I don't know, is that still a relevant movie? But in any case, they're going to pull in that prior knowledge, and that's going to allow this learning opportunity to become an even richer opportunity for your students. All right, so she lives and works in Mozambique. And there we go. I copied and pasted the Google Maps there for you. Always powerful to go right to the map so you can zoom in and out. And Dr. Poole observes animals. Specifically, she observes elephants. Now, when we start talking about elephants, we do have to ask our students, what type of elephant lives in Mozambique? Now, I kind of gave it away here on the slide because down here on the bottom, there's captions. One says African elephant, one says Asian elephant. So you can probably put the two together. But if you were presenting this with your students, you would say, or maybe you just put the two pictures up and you'd say, what type of elephant do you think lives in Africa? What are the differences between the two? Isn't an elephant, right? What's the difference between the two? Well, our African elephants are distinguishable for a number of characteristics. In general, they tend to be a little bit larger. Now, when you're just looking at a picture of an elephant, you don't really get that appreciation. But when you put them next to one another, adult elephants, you may see that the African one is just a tad bit larger than the Asian elephant. The ears on an African elephant are probably the stereotypical, very floppy ears that you find. Asian elephant ears tend to be a little bit further back along the elephant's head. Let's see, the African elephant also has more of like a stereotypical, if you ever see a cartoon drawing or depiction of an elephant, it tends to be the African elephant. Now, here in San Diego, we are so lucky. We have a world-class institution that is the San Diego Zoo. And of course, the San Diego Zoo, it has two locations. It has the downtown Balboa Park location, and then it has the Safari Park in Escondido. It just so happens, between those two locations, we have African and Asian elephants represented. Asian elephants are downtown in the Balboa Park Zoo. So if you are visiting Balboa Park, you can see an Asian elephant, or rather a whole group of them, a herd of them. And then if you're up in Escondido, you can see the pen that holds the African elephants. So you can travel the world in about 45 minutes if you visit both parks in one day. Now, I want to go back to Dr. Poole for a moment. She observes elephants in Mozambique. And I want to share with you a video that I encourage you to watch in its entirety on your own. I'm going to attempt to stream some of it through Zoom. I know sometimes it's kind of hit or miss when I try and stream a video through our Zoom session. But I think it's really valuable for our session today for you to see exactly how a scientist makes animal observations. So this link is included in the bit.ly link that I shared with you, and it will take you to a PBS website. So PBS has a fantastic wealth of information. And one of the links is on animal behavior in a park, essentially Mozambique's equivalent of our national park system. Dr. Poole is going to observe a group of elephants, again, African elephants, and she's going to pick up on the behaviors. Notice how she hones in on the animal behaviors. So I'm going to full screen this. I'm not going to play the entire thing. I'm going to play maybe half of it, but watch as she observes and makes note of the behaviors.
To find new elephants, we focus on the areas with their favorite foods. The different forests that the elephants feed in make natural boundaries. And as we move between palm forests and yellow fever trees, the whole world around us changes. The elephants love fever trees. And I think their bright green bark is just magic.
Oh, there are a lot of those.
Yeah, they're all coming this way.
Oh, man.
Hey?
That's a female? That fluffy-eared thing? She's
Yeah.
huge.
I know, she's big, huh? She's got something funny about her. It's a crumpled ear.
Oh, love it. That was a contact dancer. She would have heard somebody in the distance calling her. They have these really low frequency calls that travel a long distance. I still think there are more coming. So we're talking like about 30, right?
35. This is a young bull who's following the herd. He's not a threat. Young bulls are funny. They like to pretend that they have a lot of confidence, but the fact is they don't. Oh, it's okay, silly guy. They're so predictable. The adult females, it's harder to know what they're gonna do.
Oh, she's smelly. The periscope sniff. It's always when they really want to find out more information about something that's concerning to them. And then it's telling others, hey, pay attention over that direction. If that is pointing, that's pretty cool.
I'm filming these gestures to help Joyce build her dictionary of elephant communication. I'm also the getaway driver, so I have to watch our backs.
She's looking at us with a twisted throat. That means she's undecided.
She gonna chase us now? Joyce, I'm gonna give her a
Right on top. Stop. Yeah. That's what that trunk twisting was about back there.
with the foot.
When the foot's like that, she's thinking.
So what is she calling the others to come help? It's like, well, I guess one charge wasn't enough. Why don't you guys come help me?
I don't think we should be moving away from them.
Okay, so that little buffer right there, that was probably a good indication to pause. And I just want to recap for a moment some of the things that we saw in this video. First off, that was Dr. Joyce Poole and her partner, who is the getaway driver and also the co-photographer. And Dr. Poole was the one mentioning the gestures and then associating a behavior with it. So for a moment there, she said, as the periscope goes up, basically she's considering the trunk to be a periscope. As the periscope goes up and sniffs around, that's an indication that the herd of elephants is unsure of their surroundings. So maybe the elephants were on high alert because they sensed the Jeep that Dr. Poole was in was nearby. So they kind of were on high alert and they sniffed around at the air. And sure enough, moments later, one of the larger elephants, possibly a mama elephant, charged the Jeep. And so if I look at an animal and I associate a behavior with that animal, I'm going to sound a little nutty, you know, and I have pets. I've had cats. I have 2 dogs right now. And when I associate human behaviors, when I say, you know, my dog is thinking, I kind of get these weird looks like, how do you know that? You don't know that. You don't really know what your animals are doing. We're putting human traits on an animal. And I'm not an expert, so that's just because I love my pets. But Dr. Poole has been working with elephants for her entire career, for over 30 years. And it's through this constant observation that she is able to observe over an extended period of time specific behaviors and then sort of the thought process behind the animal that's associated with that behavior. So there's a difference between the behaviors that we associate with our pets at home. That's not necessarily an expert opinion that we are associating with. And then there's a difference between what Dr. Poole is doing in the field with elephants. She has dedicated her entire life to creating a catalog of animal behaviors. And of course, that catalog can then be used by other scientists for future work on animal behaviors. Okay, so this link is in the Google Drive. We only made it about halfway through. This is one of my favorite videos. It's so cool that she's able to associate sort of the thought process behind the elephant when she sees a behavior or an action on part of the elephant. Okay, so let's go back to our slides for a moment. Let's see what else we have. Okay, so now here's essentially what Dr. Poole is doing. When she creates this behavior dictionary, she creates something called an ethogram. Ethogram, that's one of our SAT words for the day. An ethogram is a list of behaviors and then a description of those behaviors. And now when a scientist is documenting these behaviors in the field, they may create codes so that they can write down the behaviors quickly. So let's run through this chart for just a moment. The first category here, the category on the left, we're going to leave that blank for now because we don't go into our observations knowing how to categorize our behaviors. We have to first make observations and see all of the behaviors. And then once we gather all of the behaviors, let's say 24 behaviors, then we can start categorizing it. So put the category column off to the side for just a moment. The behavior column is going to document essentially everything that the elephant does. And one thing that our students get caught up on is when an animal is seemingly doing nothing, like when an animal is laying down sleeping, your students may say, my animal's not doing anything. Well, guess what? Sleeping is a behavior. It's something that can be documented and observed, and it's something that you should put down because sleeping is just as much of a behavior as eating and drinking, right? So when we do get into the component where we're going to make our own animal observations, even the apparent lack of behavior is still a behavior itself. And sometimes we need to remind ourselves and remind our students of that. The third column is code, and the code can be made up. The code is essentially the first letter or the first several letters of a behavior. And this is going to come into play in just a moment, and I'll share my next screen and you'll see how the code plays in there. But the behavior is then linked with a description. So we have to scaffold this. We have to provide this in a way for our students so that they know that a behavior is like a one-word thing. And then from there, we describe what that behavior looks like. So sparring. We may have different interpretations of what constitutes sparring, but the description tells us that testing strength playfully by pushing against one another's head, now we know, oh, okay, this is a playful thing. This is not two animals attacking one another, even though it might look like it, it's in a playful manner. Now, let's compare that with something in the protection category, where an animal is in a defensive circle down here at the bottom, DC, encircling young with heads facing out. So now that's defensive, that's not playful. That means that the elephant is fearful and it's putting itself, the adult elephants are putting themselves in between the threat and the baby elephants. So now that we start gathering all these behaviors, we can start categorizing them. And here there are 3 categories listed. Social behaviors, these are playful things. These are let's go, where a baby elephant and a mother elephant are kind of playing back and forth, deciding what direction to go in. Again, the sparring, 2 baby elephants kind of with one another, if you will. And of course, a feeding category that's pretty self-explanatory. And now, if you are a scientist and you're in the field and you're observing elephants, do you think you're going to see a lot of protective behaviors? I mean, you're sort of intruding on their territory. So the likelihood of the elephants exhibiting protective behaviors likely increases just due to your presence. So you have to think about that as well. Why are there so many protective behaviors? Well, that's because you're looking at them. That's because you got cameras pointed at them and they can sense that. Okay, so now this is our ethogram. This is the dictionary of animal behaviors. The field journal is where you start making the observations over time. Now, you as the scientist, you need to decide how frequently you are going to make your observations. And again, the Field Museum's PDF that is in the Google Drive, it explains about 3 or 4 different ways that you can make observations. Basically, it comes down to the interval. how frequently are you making observations? In the field journal I have on the screen, the observations are made every 30 minutes. So that means a scientist is sitting in his or her Jeep from 8 a.m. in the morning until 6 p.m. at night. And every 30 minutes, that scientist is looking at what the elephant is doing, and they're using the code to document that. Now, you might say, why do you need a code every 30 minutes? You can just write it out. And that is true. But what if your observations were being made every 15 minutes, or I'm sorry, every 15 seconds? What if the interval was much more rapid? Or what if you were making multiple observations? What if there were 30 elephants and you were trying to capture the behaviors of all of those elephants in a very small amount of time? You can now start to see how the code can become very handy, right? So you can just write down LGED, right? You can just write down that single letter to denote their behaviors. So here, our scientists observed 2 elephants simultaneously. When we look at the raw data, meaning when we look at the behavior and the associated codes, we can't really make sense of who elephant A is and who elephant B is, and we can't really make sense of any patterns either. So what can we do? Well, if we interpret this data, if we analyze and interpret this data, that's a science practice from our science standards. This is what we get. This is an example of what we might see if we graph the data. So let me walk you through this bar graph for a moment. The red color is elephant A. The blue color is elephant B. I don't know who elephant A is. I don't know who elephant B is, but maybe we can find out after we analyze and interpret the data. Both elephants appear to eat at the same frequency, meaning 5 out of the, let's say there's 20 observations. Out of the 20, 5 times one elephant ate, 6 times another elephant ate, right? So eating was a frequent behavior. They both drank about the same amount. The blue elephant, and I'll use blue as in the color of the bar chart here is blue. The blue elephant engaged in sparring. Remember, that's a social behavior. The blue elephant engaged in playing. In both cases, the red elephant didn't engage in social behavior at all. The red elephant, however, did exhibit a let's go behavior, basically saying, hey, let's keep moving, let's go. Both equally engaged in head raising and head shaking, but the red elephant did the periscope sniff, which was that raised trunk to sniff out the environment to see if there were any threats around. And then, of course, elephants both did trunk and defensive circles equally. So based on this information, you can shout it out over your microphone, or you can type it into the chat room. What type of elephant do you think is the red elephant? What type of elephant do you think is the blue elephant? Meaning they're both African elephants, right? But male, female, baby, adult, what do you think, which is which?
Red is female.
Okay, we have a vote for red being female. Red is female. What about the blue one?
Male, a young male.
And Jessica, why do you say the blue one is a young male? What evidence did you gather on this graph that made you say that?
Because he plays a lot, and the staring too.
Okay. So based on the data, right, let's go back just a brief moment. If we look at this, we have no idea what's going on, right? This is the raw data. This is just strictly the observations from the field. But once we start making sense of this data by putting it into a graph, we can start to pull out patterns. And the patterns are that the red elephant appears to be an adult. Now, if you were actually making these observations, you would know this firsthand because you saw these elephants with your eyes. But if you're just looking at the data, you may say the red elephant is an adult, maybe male, maybe female, I'm not sure. But the red elephant exhibited more defensive behaviors. And that's most obvious here in the periscope sniff. The blue elephant could be male, could be female, we're not sure. But the blue elephant engaged more in playful behaviors. And a more playful elephant, one that engages in more social behaviors, tends to be a younger elephant. So if you're saying, hey, I think the blue one is a young one, I think the red one is an adult, you're right on target. And in fact, this data demonstrates a mom elephant, a female adult mom, and a baby male elephant. The gender aside, right? That's not necessarily the key component. The dynamic that you can really pull out from this data, though, is adult and baby. So that's essentially what we can gather from our elephant behavior data from the field. Okay, so here is something that we all need to remind ourselves of. Making observations is doing science. Observations are one of the most accessible forms of science. If you want to do science and you go, oh man, if only I had $500, I could buy that kit at the science store and I can bring in all these really cool things. And if only we had the funding to do that, sure, those are all wonderful opportunities and I'm not downplaying those, but students can do science using the things that are built in to their bodies. And by that, I mean, they can use their ears, they can use their eyes, they can use their sense of touch, they can use their sense of smell to do science. Dr. Poole relies on her vision and her hearing to do the majority of her work. And so we can replicate this in our classroom. And then think about how accessible this is, whether we have students at home or we have them in person. Making observations is nearly a universal way for our kiddos to do science. All right, so we're going to transition over to the San Diego Zoo animal cams. Now, if you have the, let me go ahead and, oh, before I do that, let me share one more thing with you. I forgot to mention this in the beginning, I apologize. Depending on the age group that you are teaching, you may want to introduce animals living together and exhibiting behaviors in different ways. So for example, an upper elementary or a middle school student, you may be able to play that video, Dr. Poole, right off the bat, right? That might be a great way to introduce the topic. However, for our younger kiddos, for the ones who are in early school, you may want to say, hey, how about we read a book to introduce animals living together or living in groups? And so these are two books. Now I have no affiliation with the stores. You can go online and search on your own, but I want to give you two titles of books that I found helpful, that I've used personally with my students, that are not only get them engaged and get them activated in this topic, but they're just really fun to read. So one of them is called An Ambush of Tigers, a wild gathering of collective nouns. So when you talk about a group of animals and you say a group of elephants is a herd, and a pack of lions is a pride, and a group of crows is a murder, right? So those are collective nouns. And this book has like 30 collective nouns, and I guarantee no matter who you are, you will learn one or two collective nouns, ones that you've never heard before. So that's really cool. It's a really fun way to layer in some of that language into your science activity. That's a fun book. One that's a little bit more non-fiction-y, that maybe really is a little bit more content, but again is grade appropriate. This one I think is for our K-2 groups. It's Animals That Live in Groups, right? It's a simple enough title, but it's by Kelsey Turner Tarangela, if I say that name correctly, but you can, if you search for Kelsey's book on animals that live in groups, you can find this. So again, if you're looking for the literacy component, if you want to layer that in, that's always beneficial, and it might be a great way to introduce this topic with some of our younger students. All right, now here comes the fun part. I'm going to place the link to the animal cams at the San Diego Zoo in the chat room. I encourage you to click on these links on your own. If you don't have the ability to follow along at home or at work, I'll click on a few links on my shared screen so that you can see it that way. I know some of you are juggling multiple commitments at the same time, but I want you to have the opportunity to explore the animals that you are most interested in. So in general, overall, our animal cams are sort of broken up into a few different categories. Animals that are really active and engaging, and then other animals that sleep all day. and so it just so happens the animals that your students are going to want to observe are the ones that sleep all day. So I don't know what it is. Every time I do this, all the boys want to go and click on the tiger cam. They all want to see the tiger. I want to see the tigers. I'm right there with them. But let's see if this is true. What's our doing right now? Not even in the camera. Sleeping in a corner somewhere. And you'll view this for a half an hour. You won't see a thing. And I was hoping that I'd be proven wrong, but it seems like, so like you can see the students have to click around. They can't be committed to one animal. They can't be so dedicated to one. They have to realize that in order to do this activity, they actually have to pick one of the more engaging animals. So which ones should you choose? Which ones should you direct your students to? The penguin cam. It's not that the penguins are active, it's just that there's so many penguins in this enclosure that even if half of them are sleeping, you're bound to see the other half active. And so much for that. None of them are in the camera either. Okay, so that's 2 strikes. Earlier, I was looking at this camera and there was actually a scuba diver in the tank cleaning the tank. So that was kind of a, I don't know how you would classify that behavior. Of course, that's sort of an outside influence there. The apes and the baboons, they tend to be active. They're fun. Again, you can see something here. I hope you're also clear. There we go. We've got somebody in the camera here. Not doing a whole lot, but at least we can see an animal. And that's more than what we saw in the last 2. So on your screen, as you click on that link, you navigate through the animal cams, pick one that you think is interesting, but just also don't get too committed. Don't get too set on any one animal because they just made it out of you. So real quick heads up on how these cameras work. The San Diego Zoo starts recording the animals at, let's say, I don't know, 7 o'clock in the morning, and the recording goes all the way until nighttime. So it records for 12 hours. And then during the night, because there are no lights on in the enclosures, they actually play the recording of the prior day over the nighttime. So no matter when you log on, you will be able to see animals moving around. If they were moving at all that day, you'll be able to see them. Just know though that at a certain time at night, it loops itself from the prior daytime. So here are our elephants. Here's some from the let's see, we've got an African elephant there. This must be the safari park. This must be the one in Escondido. So pick an animal, take a look, and that was actually a good shot of the elephants because they were pretty active. And now what I'd like you to do is I'd like for you to go back to the, let's see, go ahead and get the link up here. For those of you who are just joining, or for those of you that didn't get the link the first time, here's the link to the shared Google Doc that we're working out of. I know I'm sending you to a lot of different websites, but if you click on that animal observation link, you'll see a folder where you can actually download this file and use them with your students. But for purpose today, sorry, I got a connection unstable. Okay, I'm back. So for our purpose today, you're welcome to click on one of these files and start filling it out as if you were a student. And we can walk through this file. As have the animals observing in one corner. Pick a random file. I think there's like 30 files to choose from. If you pick one in the middle, you'll get one that's yours. If everyone clicks on student 1, we'll all be working out of the same file. Okay, so put your name, put the animal that you're observing in here. And the first thing that you want your students to do is you just want them to forget about documenting, forget about doing anything. Just give them 10 minutes to just observe. Just get them oriented with the animal. No pencils, no typing into documents, just strictly observe the cameras for an extended period of time. And you really need to give them a decent enough time here, 5 to 10 minutes, so that they can really appreciate the animal that they are going to begin documenting. The second part, after they make some basic observations, is to start working on the ethogram. And remember, when we document our behaviors in the ethogram, we want to use one word. So sleeping, eating, running, swimming. Notice a commonality there? They're all verbs, right? So typically you'd want to use a word like that for your behavior. And then when you go over to the description, that's where you add details. So what does that behavior actually look like? Well, when an animal is running, what is the difference between a run and a trot, or a trot and a walk? Like, do you want to differentiate between those? And if you do, use your description to help explain the difference between the two. And then, of course, that last column is our short. That's our abbreviation. So if this was running, let's say, um, walk, but faster. You might provide a different description than that, but for our purpose today, you get the idea. And then R, we'll use R for running. And then you always want to provide opportunities for students to ask questions. If you have ever used KWL, know, want to know, and learn, you know that it's always good to check in on students to see if they have any questions. What are they curious about? What do they want to know? This could be related to the ethogram. This could be related to their animal, but you want to do frequent check-ins, especially when you're doing something brand new, like observing and documenting animals. That's your opportunity to jump in and clear up any misconceptions or to clear up any misunderstandings that your students may have. All right, so now we have the field journal. Now that students have documented a series of behaviors, they're going to actually document these behaviors in intervals. So my timing here is every 15 seconds, simply because we don't have 12 hours in our classroom to document them all day. But every 15 seconds, we'll get them in the habit of ignoring all behaviors in between seconds 2 and 14 and documenting only what they see when that 15-second mark ticks by. Documenting what they see when that 30-second mark ticks by. So if they're running for 14 seconds and then they stop on that 15-second mark, the behavior is not running. Behavior is standing still. So you have to sort of discipline the students and let them know that when we make these observations, we're not making continuous observations. We're only observing sort of a snapshot of that animal's behavior every interval, in this case, every 15 seconds. And you as the teacher, you may want to say, you may want to have a stopwatch or your cell phone out so that, or look at the clock, and you may want to say, 15 seconds, and they have to write down their observations. 30 seconds, and they write down their observations, right? So we're only taking snapshots of their behaviors on the intervals. And again, over here on the right-hand side, we want to constantly ask the students, what is the animal doing? How can you tell? How can you tell what they're doing based on the behaviors that they're exhibiting? Any patterns? Any repetitive things that you can pick up on? Maybe, maybe not. And we always have to layer in math. This is a STEAM conference, isn't it? Right? So that M part, we can't get away from that. And in this case, we can analyze and interpret data. And in this case, we're going to find a proportion. Now, a proportion is how many total behaviors did we observe? So let's say we observed 50, or I'm sorry, let me say that again. Let's say we took 50 observations, 50 observations. And 10 of those times, the animal was eating. So what proportion of the time, or what percentage of the time, was the animal eating? So if the animal was eating 10 times out of 50 observations, our fraction would be the total number of times that behavior was observed over the total number of observations made. So it would be 10 over 50. 10 over 50, if we do the math and then we multiply by 100 to get a percentage, we could say that 20% of the time the animal was eating. So getting students to work with their data and use math to manipulate and represent the data in different ways is where you can layer in your math component. Now, just like our graph that Dr. Poole generated through her observations, we can use some of the tools in Microsoft Word to create graphs as well, or rather Microsoft Word, Google Docs, whatever you have open. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with this functionality, if you click on your graph, take a look at this little guy up here in the top corner. It looks like a link. So first off, you can insert these graphs using the insert button, and you can insert a chart in Google Docs. So many of you may be familiar with that, but if you bring in a chart, you can input data by clicking on the chart, clicking on the bar graph, and then clicking on this link at the top. If you open the source, look what you get. You get a Excel sheet. And so I can go in here. Load for a second. There we go. So now I can go in here and I can change my So I can go in and I can edit the Excel sheet that corresponds to that graph and go back. I can update my graph and look, my columns down at the bottom, they changed. I've got standing, walking, eating, and for some reason behavior 4 didn't update. But in any case, I can create a graph using the data that I just gathered from my animals using the animal cams at the zoo. So you can, you don't have to necessarily draw out a graph by hand. You can use the tools that are embedded in Microsoft Word or Google Sheets. So if you have any questions about that, that's something I'm happy to help you with. I know I kind of went through that quickly, but use the tools that are available to you. You can create a graph in a sheet, kind of like one that's already created, and then you can just have your students edit the Excel sheet, which may make it easier for them to just take their data and plop it right into the document that they're working out of. Okay, so I've done a whole lot of talking. I hope that in the background you've had an animal camera up, and I'm curious to hear from those of you who are following along at home if you found any interesting animals and any interesting behaviors during your time observing your animal. Does anyone want to share what they've seen so far?
I've seen my elephant, I've been on the elephant cam and they were just kind of eating, walking around.
Okay, so there you go. That's 2 observations, or rather that's 2 behaviors. So walking around and eating. So while they may be doing them simultaneously, we do want to separate out those as 2 separate behaviors, because an animal, or rather an elephant, could just walk around by itself, or it could just eat, right? So we want to make sure that we tweeze apart those behaviors if there happens to be 2 of them wrapped together. So awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Does anyone else want to share a behavior that they observed? Burrowing cam, you can see the outside enclosure. Yeah, so a lot of the animals at the zoo, they're active at night. And of course, the recordings don't capture nighttime behavior. That's just sort of the nature of some of our nocturnal animals at the zoo. Again, you kind of have to not get your heart set on any one animal, and you have to pick one that's active. Again, the apes, the baboons, the koalas, the penguins, and the elephants tend to be active during the day. Yeah, the burrowing owl. When you see that burrowing owl, you're like, oh man, this is cool. But you got to watch for a while in order to pick up on any movement. But again, the lack of movement, meaning the possibly the sleeping behavior, is still something that you can document. It's just maybe not as engaging as some of the other behaviors that you can document on the other cameras. Uh-oh, our eval form needs to be updated. I think that's an easy fix. I think that's because we had a little switcheroo there with the session. Okay, so just know that we've got some really awesome resources, and there is simply no replacement for taking your students to the zoo or taking them to the safari park. For a number of reasons, that's not always a viable option. But we can use technology to bring the zoo experience into the classroom. And while I'm promoting the San Diego Zoo because they're a hometown resource, there are animal cams from zoos all over the world. And if you do a Google search for that, you can pick up on them, right? So if you feel kind of stuck with the animals that you have available to you here at the zoo, do a quick search and see what else you can find. The document that you are working out of, the Google document, can be used with any camera. In fact, at my old job back in New York City, there was a camera trained on a pigeon's nest on the side of a skyscraper. And the pigeons had babies and little chicks, I guess, for pigeons. And you can make observations in an urban environment, right? You're not restricted to going out into this wide open space or the safari park or the zoo. You can do them in any environment that you live in, because there's wildlife all around us. We just have to look around and make those observations. So I want to leave the last few minutes sort of open and available for your comments. I think it's really valuable that we share out any implementation ideas, next steps ideas, or suggestions moving forward. So does anyone want to share what they heard and how they would want to incorporate this with their students?
I'll share. I like the way you did it. Is if we're in an online setting, that we could have the kids pick an animal, have the form that they can observe and then share out if we're, if we're all online, which we won't be much longer.
Yeah, this is definitely an activity that's friendly for, online, hybrid, in person. You can do this as a whole group and everybody observes the same animal, or you can break them into smaller groups and each group can pick a different animal. So
Yeah.
there's a number of different ways that you can have the students, they can engage at different levels. Of course, being online, we're doing it now online, so you can see how that can work too.
I had a question about the eval. Since yours is not on there, should we select the other presenter that was equity and computer science? Because that
Yeah.
wasn't the original one. It was in addition to yours.
Yes, sorry about that. I thought we went through and corrected all of them, but we missed one. We missed that eval form. So yes, if you could please use the How to Improve Equity in Computer Science
Perfect.
eval form. Sorry about that. We had a sort of a last minute switch there, and we still wanted to provide you opportunities to engage during the conference, but we apologize for not going back and making all those proper corrections.
No
Does anyone
problem.
else want to share in our last minute or two together? Does anyone else want to share some ideas for next steps or implementation? All right. Well, you're welcome to type into the chat room any thoughts that you have. You're welcome to unmute, but I do want you all to make sure you copy down that bit.ly link, because you can go back to that. You can access the PowerPoint, of course. You can go and access that PDF from the Field Museum. You can find to the books. You can find links to the PBS site with Dr. Poole making observations in Mozambique. Everything that we talked about and everything that we discussed is right there on that Google Drive. And then, of course, the worksheet that we used, that I walked you through and that some of you filled out, is also available. You're welcome to download that and you're welcome to use it. I did my best to put to make it English and Spanish in there. Feel free to change it and modify it so that it meets the needs of your students. And you can do that by downloading it locally and making those appropriate changes. But I would be really excited to see this happening in your class, whether it be in person or virtually. So if you do use this at any point in the future, let us know. Take a picture, blur out the kids' faces. Let us see this in action. Let us see the kids making these observations. We are always really excited to see these things be implemented. And if you have any future feedback, we would love to hear that. So I want to thank all of you for signing on. Thanks for waking up early in the morning and observing some animals. I hope this was a fun way to begin wrapping up your 5 days here at the STEAMpower Conference.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. So if you just now know that there are animal cams at the zoo, I think that is a win, right? And then anything more you do with that, whether it's a formal observation like what we did, or if you just show them the animals and they make some informal observations, knowing that that webcam page there is a resource for you, I think that's definitely a win for the day. Awesome. Thank you so much for signing on. Sherlyn and do you have any final things to say?
No, just thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thanks so much. And then again, if you're filling out that eval form, just go ahead and use the prior session title, which is How to Improve Equity in Computer Science. Thank you so much for filling that out.
Thank you.